right, we're ready to go. Good morning, my name is Selena Dorme. I'm the Engagement Coordinator for the First Nations Public Service Secretariat and also a proud member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver. But I'd also like to recognize the neighboring nations also on this unceded territory of the Musqueam and the Squamish peoples. I'm pleased to welcome you to this virtual event. Before we get started though, I'd like to bring on Elder Larry Grant from the Musqueam First Nation to provide a prayer and opening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning. Larry Grant is my name, and I'm from the Musqueam First Nation. Siyam Nashiya, Siyatalatin, Tiswalap, Ahui Namat, Shui Ti, Tisan Samokat Musqueam, Kaka Shuanist, Tanit, Slavatas, E. Kwame. Ste ekwanas Jowenels, kus hiloktok de Hunas, E. McNetten, kus we to E. Setisum to Ne to swallow, E. Hiloktala, Hitep Ellis, Yempnas Yaya. Wanana I, Tennis Qualowin, Quince, E. Theatala, we to E. Tanawale, Hitep Ellis, Yempnas Yaya, Theasom. Just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me here this morning to be able to give the land acknowledgement as our ancestor Kayapolano had done in the past in greeting the first visitors to arrive on our shores, and raise my hands as they have done before in welcome to all of you to our traditional, ancestral, unceded lands of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people, our relatives from Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish that we share our lands with. And it's really my pleasure to be able to be here, to be able to say thank you and welcome. And for all of these things that have happened to assist our community members that are not able to live at home because we don't have infrastructure in many of our reserves, and there's no way that there are funding for programs and that are required. And also in this time of COVID-19, it brings together community meaning. It's very meaningful for our community members to be able to access assistance in many of the programs that on-reserve relatives enjoy and benefit from. And this is a really, really big step forward for a lot of our community members to be included as band members in our communities. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elder Larry Grant, for opening up today's event in a good way. As always, we weren't able to see you today, but lovely to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So good morning again. I'm pleased to get this party started. The Government of Canada has reached out to us again to recognize the actions taken here in British Columbia by the recipients of the Indigenous Community Support Fund's Off Reserve and Urban Stream. As recipients ourselves, we're pleased to welcome you all and reflect on our shared efforts to support those who need it most during this crisis. We're joined today by a Member of Parliament for the West Vancouver Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky, Patrick Weiler, Robert Phillips, Executive Task Group Member for the First Nations Summit Society, and Jehan Casey, the Director of First Nations Public Service Secretariat. So I'd like to go ahead and bring on Member of Parliament Patrick Weiler.
Bonjour, good day, Tunoyak. Thank you, Selena, for the kind introduction, and for Elder Larry Grant for your prayer and opening words, and for your land acknowledgement. I'd also like to thank these three nations for your stewardship of these lands and for welcoming us to this beautiful place. I'd also like to acknowledge that the life of the recently passed Ronald Sparrow is being celebrated at this time. Mr. Sparrow was the defendant in the landmark Supreme Court of Canada case that defined Aboriginal fishing rights in our country. We are all thankful for what Mr. Sparrow did to advance Indigenous rights right across the country, and my thoughts and prayers are with his loved ones and with the whole Musqueam Nation. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen incredible efforts made to protect the most vulnerable, including our elders and our youth, at a time when they need it most. Women's groups, homeless shelters, mental health supports, and assistance with food delivery, just to name a few examples, have been organized by community-based organizations from coast to coast to coast. We are deeply humbled by their work and thankful for all that they do. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Government of Canada announced the COVID-19 Economic Response Plan on March 18th of this year. As part of this plan, over the course of the last 7 months, over $2.1 billion in dedicated targeted support has been provided for Indigenous peoples. This includes $685 million in dedicated funding through the Indigenous Community Support Fund to prevent, prepare, and respond to COVID-19, and to address the immediate needs of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities in responding to the pandemic. $15 million of these funds was originally committed to support organizations and communities that deliver services to off-reserve First Nations people and Indigenous peoples living in urban centers. First Nations in my riding have told me, and First Nations right across the country let our government know that this was not sufficient to meet the needs that we have. As a result, on May 21st of this year, our government committed an additional $75 million in funding for a total commitment of $90 million. And I want to acknowledge the incredible efforts of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership that have been absolutely instrumental in the development of this program. Your insights, your advocacy, your passion, your attention, and your compassion towards your communities has ensured that this program has been brought forward in a timely, effective, and efficient manner. When you strongly recommended that these funds be made available, we listened. With that said, I'm very pleased to announce approximately $6.4 million in funding has been provided to 62 Indigenous organizations across BC through the Indigenous Community Support Funds, Off Reserve, and Urban Stream to address the current COVID-19 pandemic. These projects are designed and delivered by and for First Nations to ensure they meet the distinct needs of many of the 198 First Nations in our province. I am especially pleased to announce our support for 3 projects in West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country. The First Nations Summit Society received $75,000 in funding to support the efforts of First Nations Public Service Secretariat and its mission to strengthen and enhance capacity in First Nations communities and organizations across British Columbia on an individual, organization, and nation level. FNPSS will work with Indigenous specialists to provide training within a virtual environment that will assist First Nations communities and organizations across the province to address and respond and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Squamish Nation received approximately $64,559 for 2 projects, one that will provide care packages to elders 65 and over who are individuals at an elevated medical risk. The second project will connect families with public and independent schools to fill any gaps for their vulnerable learners that they cannot meet, and to set up a learning hub and provide electronic devices for K-12 students so that they can safely learn from home. With $237,000 in funding, the Government of Canada is also supporting the Hulaten Family and Community Services, which will support families and elders navigate and apply for government support programs, access mental health supports, provide housing supports such as moving expenses or maintenance, to access healthy food deliveries, transport individuals to essential appointments or shopping needs, activity and storybooks, and curriculum for children ages 2 to 5. We also know how important open communication is at this time to ensure swift distribution of information, which can help save lives. Canada's First Nations radio media is receiving $200,000 in funding that will guarantee the delivery of culturally sensitive, focused, and timely messages to communities in BC about the COVID-19 virus and about flattening the curve. This station broadcasts to 82 communities in central, coastal, and northern BC and has an audience of about 110,000 listeners. This includes about 40,000 Indigenous people in remote and rural communities with vulnerable populations that are not otherwise accessed by other forms of media. And while this pandemic has been difficult and stressful in many ways, that feeling is no more prevalent than in people's homes. With kids going back to school, our parents are left worried. With $350,000 investment in the Carrier Sekani Family Services, education and activity and kids activity care packages can assist First Nations, Inuit, and Métis parents to complete their daily routines and schedules to assist with incorporating structure to ease parenting stress. And lastly, I want to highlight a $200,000 investment to the Tanaha Nation Council. This investment will address homelessness in urban Aboriginal communities and help keep our most vulnerable safe during isolation and in quarantine. This includes funding for personal protective equipment, supplies, security to monitor facility access while maintaining distancing requirements, and provides for plexiglass to ensure safe spaces for staff at urban facilities. And these are just some of the 260 organizations and communities that were allocated funding through the urban and off-reserve stream of this fund right across our country. And they support a wide variety of measures. Our role as the Government of Canada is to support communities in doing what best suits their needs. And the objective of this funding was to provide community level leaders with the flexibility required to address the specific needs of their communities as the crisis evolved. These organizations are the most trusted to deliver services to help these communities weather these difficult times. And this fund is one of a multitude of vehicles to address both individual and public health needs of Indigenous peoples in relation to the pandemic, which has strengthened the partnership of Indigenous peoples and the Government of Canada as we navigate this pandemic and as we seek to emerge stronger together on the other side. Merci beaucoup pour votre travail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MP Weiler, for your words. I'd like to just recognize really quickly that there was a slight glitch, and unfortunately, most of our attendees were unable to hear the beginning of this webinar, which acknowledges the traditional territory and the opening prayer from Elder Larry Grant.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Elder Larry Grant. So I'd like to call on him again, and again, apologies for the glitch, and for the folks who missed that in the beginning of the webinar. We definitely understand it is an important protocol, and so we want to acknowledge that now. So Elder Larry Grant, if you don't mind speaking again and opening up this webinar again in a good way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Selena, for introducing me. Nasiaya Sayaslak Gonisquich, Tenit and Fumasquiam. Slak says Jovenels, Capelano, Holtimulto, cause he looks up the Quinas, Emignetten, Cushwa to San Tomokat, Fumasquiam, Skaka, to Schwalakwets, Tenit, Tlawatas, Comic. Stek wanneer je winnen, Capelano, zetten ze hem te nee te swallen, hilux dollar, te mogalop, was kwee namen, shwee te na, whale, namen, papietstok, te stelwestens, cause amestoch, te nee, te homogas mesteo, te niet Canada. I want to say thank you. Thank you for having me here this morning to do the land acknowledgement and to be able to understand a little bit of what we're involved in this morning. As our ancestor Capelano had done in the past when the first ships arrived here off the shores of Point Grey. They welcomed those visitors that arrived. And as our ancestor had done at that time, I will do this morning and raise my hands and welcome to all of you that are here today. And it's my pleasure to be able to welcome you and acknowledge the land that our three communities have lived on prior to colonization. And this morning, I'd like to say thank you to our government that has provided some funding to help our off reserve, majority of them that are off reserve in these trying times of COVID-19, because they're already separated and urbanized, and it's as if their lives don't matter. And with this assistance, where they are able to be recognized as part of the community members and being included, it is so important for their well-being and the well-being of the community that have never been able to do something that is very, very meaningful to assist our off-reserve community. So, Colette Quincy Theatala, Helix Tala, to Swallow, Inamet, Tanawale, Itep, Gasiam, Nashia, Siasam, Itska. Thank you.
Thank you again so much, Elder Larry Grant, for that opening prayer. Much appreciated.
Itska.
Thank you. Up next, I'd like to call on Robert Phillips, Executive Task Group member from the First Nations Summit Society. You're unmute, Robert.
Thank you. Wait, Chukwinukla Swetwin. As mentioned, my name is Robert Phillips. I am from Chikeskin, Canham Lake, and also a family at Skokale and Chilliwack, Stalo. I'd also like to thank Musqueam Elder Larry Grant. Appreciate the welcome and doubling down on the prayer, especially during these times. I also would like to acknowledge the celebration of life as well for Ronald Sparrow and the Sparrow Supreme Court of Canada Fisheries decision. And as you might notice here, that's Bridal Falls, and I'm calling from Chilliwack, and acknowledge the Stalo territory, the unceded territory of the Stalo. And I'm representing the First Nation Summit, and very happy to be here to celebrate and to acknowledge the Indigenous Community Support Fund and the Echo Urban funding announcement. As already mentioned, it's very trying times for us all, and there's been very limited travel and get-togethers in and out of our communities, and it's been very difficult for those that have been living away from home, and especially as well for those in our communities that miss family members and friends who live away from home. We acknowledge the First Nation leaders, the medical professionals and administrators, and many others who have worked tirelessly to support this unprecedented time for our on-reserve populations. We've heard from our communities. There's been First Nations need the support, especially for those that have been living away in urban settings, in urban centers, and away from our territories. I understand that everyone on this webinar is a recipient of funding in support of our urban and off-reserve populations and projects to reduce, such as homelessness, ensure food security, support technology needs, training, and more. Because of your projects and your work, our First Nations people that live away from our communities know that they still have the support of our communities. I want to congratulate all of you for that work, everyone. Because of your work, First Nations people in BC will hopefully not be left even further behind after this pandemic is over. Instead, hopefully will have the support that is needed to be able to go back to work, stay healthy, feed their families, and maybe even learn new skills, such as this technology that we have today in Zoom meetings and other technologies. I also want to congratulate the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. I can't say enough about the Secretariat. They've been working tirelessly, working very hard, and have made this transition seamless in some ways by providing technology such as this for our meetings that we've been having. and they have become a trusted and reliable support for First Nations as they work to adapt and respond to new circumstances during this COVID-19. The First Nations Public Service Secretariat is catered to support First Nations both on and off reserve. Just as COVID-19 is limited by isn't limited by community borders, neither is the support for First Nations Public Service Secretariat, which makes receipt of funding from the Indigenous Community Support Funding so integral to its success. Since March 2020, First Nations Public Service Secretariat has organized and hosted more than 15 webinars with more than 900 attendees from all over BC, urban centers, and over 85 First Nations. It hosted a number of town halls with government, allowing First Nation leaders to get government information quickly and ask questions and raise issues candidly. Another 800 participants in those town halls as well. As BC First Nation communities and individuals confronted and managed the challenges posed by the pandemic, access to accurate information and multiple sources in a timely manner was essential. First Nations Public Service Secretariat listened to what First Nations needed and used its relationships with partners and governments to find it, or if it didn't exist, to create it. Over 2,000 new users visited the First Nations Public Services Secretariat COVID-19 website during April and May alone. It responded to band office staff being overwhelmed trying to help their off-reserve members navigate the many benefits and supports from federal and provincial governments and other sources. First Nations Public Service Secretariat partnered with the Government of Canada to develop a series of simple information sheets. The documents for off-reserve individuals reached over 5,600 people on Facebook alone and was shared 68 times when first posted. First Nations Public Service Secretariat has met a need, a simple and common sense need, to simplify and coordinate information during an emergency and to bring First Nations people together virtually to learn and connect when they can't do physically. So to close, we would like to thank the Government of Canada for the funding and support. Thank you, First Nations Public Service Secretariat, for your hard work, but really thank all of First Nations communities and friendship centers and support workers and band managers for all of what you've done and sharing in this webinar, for what you've done and for what you continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert Phillips. Appreciate all your kind words about the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to call on Jahan Casey, Director of the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you also, Robert, for those wonderful words. And I also would like to thank Elder Grant for his welcome, and again for his welcome twice for some of us. It's inspiring words, and I could probably listen to them 10 more times and it would still add to my day. So thank you all very much. As Robert kindly noted from the First Nations Summit, FNPSS is a very grateful recipient of a small portion of this funding. FNPSS is a support organization for First Nation communities, First Nation governments, and other First Nation organizations. So we really, like Robert, are hugely in awe of the work that band managers and chiefing council and friendship center directors and community food banks and all of these organizations that have been working to support our First Nations people, both in communities and living in Vancouver and Prince George and all of the other areas that our community members have moved to across BC. What you do is the reason that our communities are going to be strong and are going to be successful, regardless of this pandemic or anything else. We're strong because we are strong and support each other. FNPSS, like I said, we try to support you. We've had 15 webinars, as Robert noted. We made the shift. We tried to make the shift quickly and, as Robert noted, hopefully seamlessly, to being able to connect the individuals that we work with from band offices and organizations virtually when we couldn't get them in a room together. We heard repeatedly that being able to share what was happening in one area of BC with another area of BC was critical. Knowing what kind of supports, what kind of information was available in a way that was easy to understand and easy to access was really at the beginning of this pandemic, when everyone was so overwhelmed, one of the most important things we could do. We're incredibly grateful to all of our partners that worked with us to put all of the information that we have on our website that we built for this, and all of our information handouts that Robert mentioned that we've been sharing on Facebook and Twitter, and that I know have been widely used and I hope are useful. We didn't do that without reaching out to the federal government, the provincial government, local government, friendship centers, again, everyone to provide information and make sure that we were being a conduit to get that information to the people who needed it. And as Robert said, it's common sense. We work with First Nation communities, we work with First Nations organizations, and simply say to them, what is your biggest challenge? And repeatedly, we get good direction, and all we try to do is meet those needs. In the coming months, with some of this funding, through this funding, we are going to continue to maintain that website and update and provide information, as well as additional training sessions that will be available virtually, and will help to provide skills in communication, basic core skills that can be applied in an office setting, a band management setting, on technology. And we're also going to be working with our partners to create a resource hub on our website. This will be a new resource that we're able to do with this that will provide our First Nations people across BC the ability to find and access training from a number of different organizations. So if they're interested in tech training, or they're interested in forestry training, or they're interested in training being provided on asset management, they'll be able to come through our website and have an access to a multitude of those from many of our partners. Because again, there are so many supports out there and so many people working diligently. And when you're working in a food bank, or in an urban center, or in a community, you just want to get the information to the people you serve as quickly as possible, and hopefully not have to send them to 47 different websites. We know that there's a number of First Nations on this call, and other recipients of this fund who have done incredible things and are doing incredible things with this money. And we would like to continue to hear from you about what else we can do to support you. Really, I raise my hands to all of you for the work you've been doing. And thank you, all of you, and stay safe.
Thank you so much, Diane. So this concludes the formal portion of this webinar, but we're going to do things a little bit differently and open the floor to questions. So if I could have MP Patrick Weiler, please turn on your video and join us. Thank you so much. Considering the small group we have, I guess we're going to do things a little bit more informally this time. So some quick instructions for all the attendees that are watching live. If you click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, you'll have the option to raise your hand. There should be a little emoji that looks like a hand, and you can ask a question live. And I understand that Diana Day also wanted to speak to her project too as well. So I'm opening it up to everybody who wants to raise their hand, but we'll start. I'll hand it over to you, MP Patrick Weiler, to get started.
Great. Well, thank you, Selena. And maybe you could just jump right into it here. I mean, I've talked quite a bit already, and I'd be really interested to hear about some of the amazing projects that are going to be delivered as part of this program. So maybe my first question can go to Miss Diana Day from the Pacific Association of First Nations Women. just to speak a little bit more about the project that she's going to be implementing as part of this program.
Great. Diana?
Sure. Hi there. I'd love to speak about the project that we're doing. We're so thrilled to be able to offer the community the services that we are right now with the Pacific Association of First Nations Women in Vancouver. We have over 160 women and families that are registered right now on for our program to receive activity boxes for children, youth, and we're also doing food delivery on a monthly basis. We've partnered with Save on Foods to do that with us, and it's working out really good. We're so thankful. The people are so grateful and so happy to be receiving the food that they are. It brings tears to our eyes just thinking about that. So I really want to say that we also got donations and volunteers. So we're doing mask making. We have a lot of volunteers that are making masks. We have Christchurch Cathedral. They're on board making masks for us. We have a lot of other women who are on board as well too, just making masks at home, doing what they can to help during this time. We also have counseling, one-to-one counseling that's open to all genders, and also a support group too that's offered on a weekly basis. So there's so much going on for people, you know, in the homeless, as well as trying to prevent homeless. So the urban population is so needs so much more support, and I'm really thankful that you're giving the support to the association here. But there's so many other communities, urban communities throughout the province that are needing support too. And just thank you, Nawa.
Thank you so much, Diana, for sharing all of that. Are there any other folks who want to ask a question live? Again, you click on the participants button and raise your hand. Christopher Livingstone. Go ahead, and going to unmute you.
Oh yeah, that wasn't from them though.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity and the invitation to the meeting. I could mention a little bit about the project with the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Center and how you guys have helped us in the downtown east side. Thank you very much. It was to create an outreach kiosk and extend some outreach services in the downtown east side. I was able to create an outreach site called Smoke Signals, where we've been able to do food banks, and we have peer volunteers. We have the directory from the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Council, and the mission of the place is to connect street people with communities, with families, and with services. So we've been successful in getting people into detox, getting people supports from income assistance. So I'm really happy. We are trying to move that that site once more. It was meant to be somewhat mobile. I had some great findings that once I opened, I have outreach workers that actually rotate around and come in from the community, and it's almost created like a union. So my thing is about helping outreach. And so when we go out there and try to help people in the alleys and in the parks and in tent cities, where is it that we're sending people? So I'm hoping that we're able to eventually get access to BC Housing's homelessness HIPAA system, so that when we engage with people, we have a place to send them. My question is around COVID, and considering how far we are into the pandemic and the conditions in the downtown east side, with services being able to not accommodate and even let people inside, how will this work out during the winter months when it gets wetter for the people that are sleeping outside? So it's more of a question and a thought around trying to make some extra space, like closing Hastings down to cars and bringing out all those Central City Foundation tents that are part of the downtown east side market, and creating those open spaces where people can still physically distance, because they're not going to be able to do it in the SROs and services are, as we know, that are all street level right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I'd like to, MP Patrick Weiler or anybody else wants to respond to that question before we move on to the next one?
Sure, maybe just a quick response here. And Christopher, first, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you're doing and for raising this really important question. And certainly that's been one of the things that have been laid bare during the pandemic was the issue of housing security. And we really do need to find innovative ways of dealing with this issue, both in a short term and a long term. And I know that's something that our federal government is very, very focused on. And I'm looking forward for good ideas and partnering with organizations like yourselves so we can find the right solutions so that we can address this critical issue going forward.
Thank you so much, MP Weiler. We have another person who's raised their hand, Tika Everest.
Yes, what going on? Yeah, my name is Dega Everest. I hail from the Mohawk Nation of Kahnawake, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Dudes Club Society, and like to acknowledge and thank you for the continued support. And where our initiative has really taken impact is supporting our 8 urban indigenous communities and the urban, both I guess on reserve as well and in prison. We're supporting a total of 34 on reserve communities, specifically around men's health. That includes PG, Prince Rupert, Smithers, Houston, Terrace, Vancouver, Kamloops, Fort St. John. And it's really our initiative has supported men to connect with health and with each other. And through culture and connecting to community, some of the initiatives that we are able to support is providing, which we in Dudes Club Society and our different sites, we would have different types of feasts or gathering places where we would have these obviously, because food always brings in community. And so that has actually switched because of COVID into a takeout gathering. So we'd invite the men and community members to come and take some of that food back. We've continued on with our talking circles to support those conversations, as well as on the land activities. And so one of the biggest pieces that is a challenge that we are finding, and especially going into the next few months, is a lot of our work is focused on isolation, ensuring that isolation is being addressed critically, finding new ways to support men to come out. And as there is a huge connection and correspondence to health. With connectivity, a lot of our rural communities and a lot of men and communities in general aren't at a level where that connectivity is something that they can easily go on a Zoom meeting. They wouldn't, many communities don't have the bandwidth to actually support being on this meeting alone. And so it is a huge factor, especially with COVID, and designing engagements that the reality of our work, as we all well know, it is moving to a digital space. So I'm curious to know, around reducing isolation, how are we supporting that strengthening those digital connectivity in that space, and wondering if that will be a topic that will come up at the summit as well. And I know that there is several initiatives coming in from the federal side on universal broadband, and how many nations are actually engaging in that to be able to support moving that forward, because that dial is coming back, and it's widening the gap around being able to support our communities.
Thank you so much, Decca Everest, for your question and your comments. I'd like to pass it back over to MP Wheeler and perhaps Robert Phillips to address any comments.
Well, thank you, Selena, and thank you for the great question, Tika. And I think you've really hit on something that has to be a big priority going forward. And you mentioned the Universal Broadband Fund as a key mechanism of improving connectivity right across the country. This is something that, in this day and age, we need to have access to high-speed internet to communicate with your loved ones, for the work that you do, to get access to critical information. So this is something that we're absolutely committed to making sure that we have access to that right across the country. I was very pleased to announce earlier today funding for a project that's connecting Whistler all the way to Cache Creek, which is going to connect the Lilwat Nation, among others, to high-speed internet. So this is one small piece of what needs to be a concerted effort, and what is a concerted effort, to make sure that all of our communities right across the country are going to have access to this internet, so that we can deal with social isolation, so they can do the work they need to do, and they have the means of communicating effectively.
Thank you so much for that. Robert, did you want to?
Sure, I'll chime in. Thank you. Yes, mental health is so important, especially during isolation and the time that we have now. I think that's a very, very important part of this story. And and I don't mean to say it's just story, because we're in a pandemic, and I totally understand that. And, by bringing people together, I love the idea about takeout. Because traditionally feasts and ceremonies and we coming together, no matter if we're in our own territories or in urban settings, we try to do that as much as possible. And the isolation factor is affecting everybody at home, or our individual selves. And now during the smoke that we have down here, it just makes it even more difficult, especially those that don't have homes and that live on the streets. So we're thinking of all of the issues and concerns that are being brought up, and connectivity and technology is going to be a big part of that. I know that the First Nations Public Service Secretariat has been working on it as well. We also have a First Nations Technology Council. All of this new technology is literally new to a lot of us. And I know that the First Nations Public Service Secretariat has picked up on it and has done a good job in the last 6 months of helping us come together virtually and to be involved and to try to help not only those that are in our communities, in our nations, but as well those that live away in urban settings. So the big question does arise. Not everybody can get a laptop. Not everybody can have a cell phone. And even if you had those gadgets, you do not always have access to technology via broadband, so via internet. And I've said this before, as soon as you go on a reserve, you see the bars on your phone go from 4 to 5 down to 1. And it's been a big criticism, but not only a criticism, but looking for solutions. And that means working with the federal and provincial government, working with local and regional, working with organizations such as First Nations Public Service Secretariat and the Technology Council to make sure that we have access for everybody so that they can enjoy this. It might not be perfect, it might not be a big social gathering, but it is a gathering in technology, and one that for now, that's the way it is. And we hope that we can expand that to isolated communities, not only in urban, but rural communities in northern BC, coastal, interior. And that doesn't just mean the communities that are centralized communities, but especially those that live on reserves, that live in our territories that might not have access to that. So it's very important and a step that we have to make.
Thank you so much, Robert. I just want to let everybody know we have to be a little bit cognizant of time. MP Weiler will have to leave us in about 5 minutes. There's one question in the group chat from Clark Olson, and then we also have another guest who has raised their hand, Henry Nelson. So we'll start with Clark. Sorry, if I can just scroll back up here. This question is for MP Weiler. Will there be any additional ICSF monies available to BC for pandemic response as we move into the winter and economic recovery phase?
Well, thank you for the question. And in fact, yes, there will be. On August 12th of this year, the Government of Canada announced an additional $305 million in funding for the Indigenous Community Support Fund. This is going to be distributed through a combination of allocations to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership, as well as needs-based funding, which will be application-driven. So this is going to follow much of the same methodology. It's likely to be distributed in the next few weeks. And then the methodology used from this is looking at population remoteness and community well-being as some of the criteria for that.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. I'd like to now ask Henry Nelson to ask his question.
Pila Kesla, could you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Pila Kesla, Nugwam Kiori. Thanks. I'm coming to you from Campbell River today. I am the executive director of an organization called Nawalaug Healing Society that is focusing a lot of our energies around, with this fund, with the help of the government, to get our off-reserve membership traditional foods. And I just thought, since Patrick was on, that I needed to ask. It seems very ironic that we're in this COVID times, and so it magnifies the lack of salmon and the wild salmon that we are experiencing. We are supposed to be providing our off-reserve membership traditional foods, and yet there's no wild salmon to catch. And so I'm wondering about the commitment that the federal government has to the Cohen Commission's recommendations of getting the farmed salmon out of the Discovery Passage out by September 30th, because we know that that is having an immense negative effect on our wild salmon. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, and yeah, since we have Patrick on. Pila Kesla.
Thank you so much, Henry Nelson, for your question and your comments.
Well, thank you, Henry, for your question, and certainly the plight that our wild salmon are in BC is absolutely top of mind, and we need to continue to do everything we can to ensure that we can restore those salmon stocks. So, we're committed to implementing the recommendations from the Cohen Commission. And it's also going to need a number of other measures, whether that's restoring fisheries habitat, whether that's looking at other investments in hatcheries and otherwise. There's a lot that we need to do. And we're committed to doing that because we know how iconic wild salmon is for everybody in British Columbia. We know the unique relationship that First Nations have towards salmon. And we're committed to doing everything we can to restore these stocks and ensure that we're going to have, not only access to this as a fishery, but for food and ceremonial purposes as well for current and future generations.
Thank you so much, MP Weiler, for answering those questions. I'd just like to mention, for all the recipients of the funding, we want to thank you. Our FMPSS, anyway, would like to thank you for sharing about the projects. And if any of your organizations would like to share information about the projects, we're happy to showcase those on our website at fmps.ca. So I just want to let everybody know that. We're running out of time, but I feel like I want to ask maybe one more question if there is. Raise your hand quickly. And all right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today. Again, I want to thank all of our panelists and our attendees today for joining us, and for all the recipients for sharing your stories on the funding and all the great things that you've been able to do with it. MP Weiler, appreciate your time. And that's really all I have for today. Thank you all so much. Stay safe and healthy out there. Bye.